The last time I was in this building, they were pushing me out. Today, they invited me back. The world's verdict about you is not your sentence, unless you sign it yourself.
The last time Samuel walked through those gates, they were pushing him out. Today, they had sent him an invitation. He stood on the pavement outside Riverside Secondary School on a cold Tuesday morning, a man of 28 in a fitted dark charcoal suit, holding a folded piece of paper that had arrived 3 weeks ago, a letter from the current principal asking if he would consider speaking to the grade 11 students about resilience and the road to success. He had read the letter 4 times before he answered, not because he was unsure, but because he wanted to make sure he was going back for the right reasons. He folded the letter back into his jacket pocket, looked at the gates for one more moment, and walked through them. 12 years earlier, he had walked out of these same gates carrying a cardboard box. Inside it, 2 textbooks that were his own, a pencil case his mother had bought him for his birthday, a photograph of his family, and the remains of a school life that had ended without warning on a Thursday afternoon in March. He was 16 years old, and the world, as far as it was concerned, had already made up its mind about him. Samuel Okafor grew up in the kind of neighborhood that people described with a pause before the name, the kind of pause that said everything about what they thought of the people who lived there without them having to say it out loud. Chesterfield, a cluster of apartment buildings on the eastern edge of the city, where the buses ran less frequently than everywhere else, and the schools were underfunded in the particular quiet way that underfunding happens when nobody powerful enough to complain lives nearby. His mother, Grace, worked as a hospital cleaner on rotating shifts, days, nights, weekends, whatever was given to her, taken without complaint because complaint was a luxury she could not afford. His father, Joseph, drove a delivery truck for a warehouse on the other side of the city, leaving before 5 in the morning most days and returning after dark, a man defined by motion and exhaustion, and a silence that Samuel had spent his entire childhood trying to interpret correctly. They were not a wealthy family, but they were not a broken one. Grace made sure of that, made sure that there was food and cleanliness and the expectation of effort and the understanding, delivered clearly and without apology from the time Samuel was old enough to understand words, that the way out of Chesterfield was through a classroom door, not around it. Samuel believed her. He was not the loudest student in his school, or the most popular, or the one teachers instinctively noticed and celebrated. But he was consistent in the way that quiet children who have been told that consistency is their only tool tend to be. He attended every class. He submitted every assignment. He read beyond the syllabus, because reading was free, and the library 2 streets from their apartment building was one of the few places in Chesterfield that felt like it belonged to everyone equally. By the time he reached grade 11, he was passing everything, not brilliantly, but passing, which in a school where the dropout rate was quietly accepted as a feature rather than a failure, was its own kind of achievement. Then came the Thursday in March. It started with a missing laptop. One of the school's 8 laptops, kept in a locked trolley in the IT room and signed out by teachers for specific lessons, disappeared on a Wednesday afternoon. By Thursday morning, Mr. Venter, the IT teacher, had reported it missing to the deputy principal. By Thursday afternoon, Mr. Venter had a name. Samuel found out he was being accused the way most accused people find out, not directly, not with evidence, not with a conversation, but through the sudden shift in how people looked at him in the corridor, the whisper that travels faster than any announcement. By the time he was called to the deputy principal's office at 2:15, half the school already knew. He sat across from Deputy Principal Marsh, a man whose default expression communicated that the paperwork this meeting would generate was the primary inconvenience, and listened as the accusation was laid out. Mr. Venter had seen Samuel near the IT room on Wednesday afternoon. Samuel did not have a scheduled class there. The laptop was missing. These were the facts as presented. Samuel told them he had been walking past the IT room on his way to the bathroom, which was at the end of that corridor. He had not gone inside. He had not touched the trolley. He had not taken anything. Marsh wrote something on a form. "Do you have anyone who can confirm your whereabouts?" he asked, without looking up. Samuel thought, He had been alone in the corridor. He had seen no one he knew well enough to call as a witness. He had simply been walking to the bathroom. "No," he said. Marsh wrote something else. Mr. Venter called into the room, repeated what he had seen Samuel near the IT room, no explanation for being there. When Samuel gave his explanation, Venter's expression did not change. It was the expression of a man who had already decided and was waiting politely for the formality of the process to catch up with his conclusion. The laptop was never found in Samuel's possession. His bag was checked, nothing. His locker was checked, nothing. His home address was visited by a school administrator the following morning, nothing. None of that mattered as much as it should have. What mattered, in the quiet arithmetic of a school in a neighborhood like Chesterfield, was that a laptop was missing, a boy had been seen near the room, and the boy had no witness and no powerful parent to make a phone call on his behalf. Samuel was suspended pending investigation. The investigation lasted 11 days. At the end of it, the school could not prove he had taken the laptop. They also, it became clear, had no intention of concluding that someone else had. The suspension became a permanent exclusion, framed carefully in the letter sent to his mother as being in the best interests of the school community, which was the administrative way of saying that the matter had become inconvenient and the easiest solution was the boy's absence. Grace read the letter at the kitchen table while Samuel sat across from her. He watched her face as she read it, watched the specific way a mother's face moves when it is trying to stay composed for the sake of the child sitting opposite her, even when what she is reading is something that should not require composure but fury. She set the letter down. "Did you take it?" she asked. "No," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, in the way that people nod when they have heard the truth and are simply confirming to themselves that they already knew it. "Okay," she said, "then we fight this." They tried. Grace wrote letters. She called the school board. She asked questions that were answered with the particular patience reserved for people the system has already decided not to listen to. 3 weeks after the exclusion, a final letter arrived confirming the decision. The school had completed its review. The outcome would not change. Samuel was no longer a student at Riverside Secondary School. He was 16 years old, without a school, without a certificate, and with a reputation in a neighborhood where reputations, good and bad, traveled faster than any official letter ever could. Joseph heard about the exclusion from Grace on a Friday evening. Samuel was in his bedroom, pretending to read, actually listening to the conversation through the thin wall between the kitchen and his room. He heard his mother's voice, steady and clear, telling his father what had happened, what she believed, what she planned to do next. He heard his father's voice, lower and harder to read, asking questions. Then he heard the sentence that he would carry with him, in various forms, for the next 12 years. "Grace, you know what kind of boys they are in that school, where there's smoke." His mother's response was immediate and sharp. His father's retreat into silence was equally immediate. The conversation ended. But the sentence remained. Samuel put his book down on his chest and stared at the ceiling of his bedroom, the same ceiling he had stared at since he was 7 years old, the one with the water stain in the corner that looked like a running man if you tilted your head. And he made a decision that was less a decision than a quiet settling of something inside him. He was not going to spend whatever came next trying to convince people who had already decided. He was not going to perform innocence for an audience that wasn't watching. He was going to do something else entirely. He was going to build something so undeniable that the accusation would eventually become the least interesting thing anyone could say about him. He did not know yet what that something was. He was 16, and the world outside his bedroom ceiling felt enormous and hostile and largely closed. But the decision was made, and once Samuel Okafor made a decision, it had a particular quality of permanence. His mother knocked on his door at 9:30 to say goodnight. "I know," she said through the door, without him having to tell her what he had heard. "I know you do," he said. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The months after the exclusion had a particular texture that Samuel would later struggle to describe accurately to people who had not lived something similar. It was not dramatic. That was the thing nobody understood when he tried to explain it years later. There was no single moment of collapse, no visible breakdown, no obvious crisis point that anyone watching from the outside could have identified as the moment things went wrong. It was quieter and more corrosive than that. It was the specific erosion that happens when a young person is removed from the structure that was supposed to carry them forward and finds themselves, suddenly, with nowhere to be. Every morning at 7:15, his body woke up at the same time it always had. School time, the alarm of a life that no longer applied. He would lie in the grey early light of his bedroom and listen to the sounds of the building around him, neighbors leaving for work, the distant rhythm of the city starting its day, and feel the particular weight of being the only person in his world with nowhere to go. Grace had arranged for him to sit the following year's exams through a private examination center, expensive, money she did not have easily, money she found anyway without telling him exactly what it cost her. She had also enrolled him in an online study program, printed out the materials at the library because their home internet was unreliable, and left them on his desk each morning before she left for her shift. He studied, not because he felt hopeful. Hope, in those first months, was something he rationed carefully, not trusting it too freely, but because studying was the one thing he could control in a life that had recently demonstrated how little control he actually had. If he could not control what people believed about him, he could control what he knew. Nobody could take that. During the day, while Grace worked and Joseph drove his routes, Samuel sat at the kitchen table with the printed materials and worked through them slowly and methodically, the way he had always worked, not brilliantly, but consistently, turning each page only when he was certain he understood what was on the previous one. In the evenings, he walked to the library. The library on Cresswell Street was not a beautiful building. It had the institutional plainness of a place built for function rather than inspiration, beige walls, fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly if the building was quiet enough, shelves that had been reorganized so many times that the system made sense only to the librarian who had been there longest. But it was warm, and it was open until 8, and nobody asked Samuel why he was there or what school he attended or what had happened to him. He started with whatever was on the shelf nearest the door. History, mostly large hardback books about events and people and the particular accidents of circumstance that determined which stories got told and which ones didn't. Then economics, because one of the books had a chapter that mentioned supply chains and he wanted to understand what that meant. Then biography, because the economics book had mentioned a man he hadn't heard of, and the biography section had a book about him. He was not reading with a plan. He was reading the way a person eats when they have been hungry for a long time, not selectively, but with a general and urgent gratitude for whatever is available. The librarian, a woman named Mrs. Peterson, who was somewhere between 50 and 70, and had the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in the company of books and was entirely satisfied with the arrangement, noticed him after about 3 weeks. Not obtrusively, she did not approach him or ask questions. She simply began, quietly and without comment, to leave books on the table nearest his usual chair. Books she apparently thought he might find interesting based on what she had seen him reading. A book about logistics. A book about a woman who had built a business from nothing in post-war Lagos. A book about how systems fail and what the people at the bottom of those systems do about it. He read all of them. He left them back on the table when he was done, neatly stacked. She replaced them with others. They never discussed it directly. It was the kindest thing anyone outside his family did for him that year, and it was done in complete silence. At 17, Samuel got his first job. It was not the kind of job that appears in motivational stories. No mentor who saw his potential, no room-changing interview, no dramatic turning point. It was a cleaning job, night shift, 3 times a week, at a block of offices on the commercial strip 2 kilometers from Chesterfield. 4 hours per shift, starting at 10 p.m., ending at 2 a.m., traveling home alone on the last bus or walking when the last bus had already gone. He had found it through a handwritten notice on a board at the corner shop, cleaners NEEDD, no experience required, apply in person. and had applied in person the following morning, arriving 20 minutes early in the only neat clothes he owned, a collared shirt his mother had ironed that morning without being asked. The man who hired him, a contractor named Pete who managed cleaning crews for several buildings in the area, asked him 3 questions. Could he be on time? Could he work without supervision? Could he start Thursday? Samuel said yes to all 3. Pete wrote his name on a clipboard. That was the entire hiring process. The work itself was straightforward and physically repetitive. Vacuuming carpets, emptying bins, cleaning bathrooms, wiping down surfaces in offices that smelled of stale coffee, and the particular synthetic warmth of computers left on standby. He did it with the same methodical consistency he brought to everything, thoroughly, quietly, without cutting corners, because cutting corners was the kind of thing you did when you thought no one was watching, and Samuel had learned early that the habits you kept when no one was watching were the habits that eventually defined you. He was the youngest person on the cleaning crew by at least 15 years. The others, mostly women, mostly immigrants, mostly people for whom this was not a temporary arrangement but a permanent livelihood, treated him with a mixture of mild curiosity and practical acceptance. One woman, Fatima, who cleaned the floor above his and had been doing so for 11 years, told him on his 3rd shift that he mopped incorrectly and showed him the right technique with the precise authority of someone who has perfected a skill that the world persistently undervalues. He thanked her and did it correctly from then on. He saved every rand he earned. Not all of it. Grace refused to let him pay rent, but he contributed to groceries without asking permission, leaving the money on the kitchen counter without discussion, the way his father left things without discussion, which was perhaps the first time he noticed a similarity between himself and Joseph that he wasn't sure how to feel about. The examination results came on a Tuesday morning in January, delivered by email to the account Grace had created for this purpose. An email address that existed solely for this notification, checked daily for 4 months before it finally contained something other than promotional messages. Samuel passed. Not every subject he failed one, the one he had struggled with most, the one whose materials had been the most incomplete in the printed version Grace had made for him. But he passed the others, including mathematics, which was the one that mattered most for what he was beginning, very quietly, to think about. He sat at the kitchen table with the results on the screen and allowed himself, for exactly the length of time it took to read the page twice, to feel something uncomplicated, something that did not require qualification or context or the careful management of expectation, something that was simply relief, and then, underneath the relief, quieter and more durable, the first real evidence that the decision he had made staring at his ceiling at 16 had not been a foolish one. Grace was at work. He texted her a single word, passed. Her response came 4 minutes later, during what must have been a break between tasks. Thank God, I always knew. He did not tell his father that day, not because he didn't want to, but because Joseph had come home late the previous 3 nights and Samuel had not seen him awake in 4 days, their schedules intersecting only in the brief and mostly silent overlap of early mornings. He told himself he would find the right moment. He was becoming, without fully realizing it, someone who was very good at identifying the right moments and then finding reasons why the current one was not quite it. At 18, Samuel applied for 43 jobs. He kept a list, a small notebook, bought for 2 rand at a stationery shop, in which he recorded the date of each application, the company, the role, and the outcome. 43 applications over 11 months. 12 did not respond. 24 responded with rejections, some automated, some personal, most somewhere in between. 7 reached the interview stage. The 7 interviews, 3 ended before they properly began, the moment the interviewer reviewed his educational history and encountered the gap, the exclusion, the incomplete paper trail of a young man whose secondary schooling had been interrupted by an accusation that had never been proved, but had never been disproved either. The explanation he gave was honest, concise, and delivered without apology. It was also, in 3 out of 7 cases, the last thing the interviewer wanted to hear. 2 interviews ended with, "We'll be in touch," which is the professional language for a decision already made in the other direction. 1 ended with a genuine offer, a warehouse position, physically demanding, paying slightly more than the cleaning job, requiring him to leave the cleaning job to take it. He took it. He was let go after 6 weeks when the warehouse lost a contract and reduced its staff, starting with the newest employees. The letter informing him was polite and impersonal, which he appreciated in the way you appreciate efficiency in something painful. The 43rd application was for a position he almost didn't apply for, an administrative assistant role at a small logistics company called Bridgeway Solutions, run from a converted garage in an industrial area 40 minutes from Chesterfield by a woman named Ruth Dlamini, who had founded the company 7 years earlier after leaving a corporate freight position that had paid her well and interested her not at all. The job posting was handwritten, not in the way of someone who couldn't use a computer, but in the way of someone who had decided that a handwritten posting would attract a different kind of applicant than a formatted template. It asked for 3 things: someone honest, someone who could learn quickly, and someone who was not afraid of work that didn't yet have a clear job description. Samuel read it 3 times. Then he sat down and wrote his application by hand as well, not because he was trying to mirror the posting's format, but because it was the only way he knew to write something that felt like it was actually coming from him rather than a version of him assembled for an audience. He sent it. He did not expect a response. Ruth called him 4 days later. Ruth Dlamini's office was not what Samuel had imagined during the 40-minute bus ride to get there. He had imagined, without quite admitting to himself that he was imagining, something that looked like the offices he cleaned at night, carpeted, air-conditioned, the quiet hum of a place that had achieved a certain scale and settled into it. What he found instead was a converted garage on a plot in an industrial area called Millhaven, with a corrugated iron roof that amplified the rain when it came, 2 metal desks pushed together in the center, shelves of lever arch files along one wall, and a whiteboard covered in delivery schedules written in 3 different colored markers. Ruth herself was sitting at one of the desks when he arrived, on the phone, gesturing for him to sit without interrupting her conversation. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, compact and precise in the way of someone who had learned early that efficiency was its own form of power, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead that she had apparently forgotten were there. She finished her call, looked at him directly, and said, "You wrote your application by hand." "Yes," he said. "Why?" He had prepared an answer for this, had rehearsed it on the bus, in fact, a clean professional explanation about wanting to communicate authentically. He discarded it the moment she asked the question because her tone made it clear that a rehearsed answer was not what she was after. "Because I thought a typed application would look like everyone else's," he said, "and I didn't think I could afford to look like everyone else." Ruth studied him for a moment. Then she picked up his application from the desk. He could see it was the actual handwritten letter, not a photocopy, and looked at it briefly as though confirming something she had already decided. "Tell me about the gap," she said. He told her all of it. The accusation, the exclusion, the 11 days of investigation, the letter, his mother's letters in response, the outcome that hadn't changed. He told it the way he had learned to tell it over 18 months and 7 interviews, concisely, without apology, without performance, and without the particular brand of excessive explanation that he had noticed made interviewers uncomfortable in a way that confirmed their existing suspicions rather than challenging them. Ruth listened without expression. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Did you take it?" she asked. It was the same question his mother had asked him at the kitchen table. He gave the same answer. "No." Ruth nodded, not the nod of someone deciding whether to believe him, the nod of someone who had already decided and was moving forward. "I can't pay you much," she said. "The role is whatever needs doing. Some days that's admin, some days that's loading a van, some days that's sitting on the phone chasing a delivery that should have arrived 3 days ago. Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. "You'll be on a 3-month trial. If it doesn't work, I'll tell you directly, and I expect the same from you. I don't like surprises, and I don't like people who wait until a problem is unsolvable before they mention it. Are we clear?" "Yes," he said. "Good." She picked up her phone again, already moving to the next thing. Monday, 7:30, don't be late. He was not late, not on Monday, not on any of the Mondays that followed, not on any of the other days in the 3 months of the trial period or the years that came after it. The work was exactly what Ruth had described, formless, variable, demanding a different version of him on different days. Some mornings he spent entirely on the phone, navigating the particular bureaucracy of freight documentation with companies whose systems seemed designed to frustrate resolution rather than enable it. Some days he drove with the delivery driver, a quietly methodical man named George who had been with Ruth since the beginning and communicated primarily through a series of precisely calibrated silences that Samuel learned over months to read accurately. Some days Ruth handed him a problem and left the room without explaining what she expected him to do with it, which he understood quickly was not negligence, but a test of a specific quality she valued above almost everything else: the ability to make a reasonable decision without being told what reasonable looked like. He made mistakes. He recorded them in the same small notebook he had used for his job applications, now repurposed, date, what went wrong, what he should have done, what he would do differently. Ruth found the notebook on his desk one afternoon and read several pages without asking permission, which he might have found presumptuous from anyone else. "You write down your mistakes," she said. "Yes. Most people try to forget them as fast as possible." "I know," he said. "I think that's why most people keep making the same ones." Ruth set the notebook down and said nothing else. But the following week, she gave him his first independent responsibility, managing the scheduling for 3 regular clients, a task that had previously been hers alone. She handed it over without ceremony, which he had learned was her way of communicating trust. In the evenings, after his shifts at Bridgeway ended, Samuel continued to study, not for qualifications now, or not only for qualifications, but because the work he was doing every day had opened questions he wanted to answer properly. Questions about supply chains and freight economics and the specific inefficiencies in small logistics operations that nobody seemed to be addressing in the academic material he was reading, because the academic material was written for people who worked in large operations, not converted garages in Millhaven. He enrolled in a part-time business management course at a community college, attending 2 evenings a week, sitting in classrooms with people who were mostly older than him and mostly there for the certificate rather than the content, which meant the questions he asked sometimes drew the slight impatience of a lecturer who had not expected the session to go in that direction. He didn't stop asking them. Ruth knew about the course. He had told her on the 2nd week, not asking permission, but keeping the communication open in the way she had said she valued. She said nothing about it except, "Don't let it make you late." It didn't. At 21, he passed the business management certificate. At 22, he enrolled in a further qualification, logistics and supply chain management, part-time, 2 years. At 23, he finished it. At no point during these years did his work at Bridgeway suffer for it. If anything, Ruth noticed and commented. In her particular way of commenting, which was to assign him something more complex rather than to say anything directly, that the coursework was making him sharper in ways that were useful to her. The conversation about his father happened on a Sunday afternoon when Samuel was 23 years old, in the kitchen of the apartment in Chesterfield, which was the same apartment they had always lived in, though the water stain on his bedroom ceiling had been painted over sometime in the previous year, and the running man was gone. Joseph was home, genuinely home, not the passing-through version of home that Samuel had grown up with, but sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, which was unusual enough that Samuel noticed it as he came in from an early shift. They sat at the same table where Grace had read the exclusion letter 7 years earlier. She was at work. It was just the 2 of them, which had historically been an arrangement that both of them managed by keeping conversations brief and practical. Samuel made himself a cup of tea. He sat down. He did not plan what happened next. He had always assumed, in the vague way that people assume things they have not fully examined, that the conversation with his father would require a specific set of circumstances. The right moment, the right opening, the right version of himself feeling sufficiently prepared. What he discovered, sitting down across from Joseph on that Sunday afternoon, was that the right moment was simply any moment in which both people were present and neither of them left. "I never took that laptop," Samuel said. Joseph looked at him across the table. He had aged in the 7 years, his hair was grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper, the specific exhaustion of a man who had spent decades rising before dawn visible in the permanent slight heaviness of his expression. He was quiet for a long time. "I know," he said finally. Samuel waited. "I knew then too," Joseph said. "I think I knew, but he stopped, started again. I was afraid of what it meant if I believed you completely and then it turned out differently. I had seen things go that way before, with people I believed in." "I was your son," Samuel said, not accusingly, just as a fact that needed to be in the room. "Yes," Joseph said, you are." He looked down at his tea. "I handled it wrong. I've known that for a long time." Samuel looked at his father, at the graying hair and the tired eyes, and the hands wrapped around the mug, large hands, the same shape as his own, which he had never noticed before or had noticed and not allowed himself to think about. "I'm not asking you to explain it," Samuel said. "I'm just telling you, because I spent a long time not saying it, and I think it cost both of us something." Joseph nodded. It was a different kind of nod from the one Samuel had spent his life trying to interpret, not closed, not retreating, just a man receiving something difficult and not running from it. They finished their tea. Grace came home an hour later to find them still at the kitchen table, not talking about anything important, just present in the same space without the specific tension that had occupied that space for 7 years. She looked at both of them. She didn't say anything. She put the kettle on. Ruth called Samuel into her office on a Monday morning when he was 24 and told him she had a problem. Bridgeway had grown, not dramatically, not the kind of growth that made headlines, but steadily and consistently in the way that businesses grow when they do what they say they will do and do it reliably. They now had 6 regular clients, 2 full-time drivers, and more work than the current systems could handle without things beginning to slip in small ways that Ruth refused to accept. "I need someone to build a proper operations structure," she said. "Scheduling, client management, driver coordination, documentation, a system that works when I'm not in the room." She looked at him across the desk, the way she had looked at him in his interview 6 years earlier, directly, with the particular attention of someone who has already made a decision and is waiting to see if the other person will arrive at the same place. "I want you to build it," she said. Samuel looked at her. "Are you offering me a different role?" "I'm offering you the role this company needs, which doesn't have a name yet because I haven't needed it until now. Operations manager is probably closest. You'd be running the day-to-day. I focus on growth and new clients." "I've never managed people," he said. "You've been managing George for 2 years," she said. "He just hasn't had to be told." This was true. Samuel had not realized it was true until she said it, which was the particular quality of Ruth's observations. They described things that had already happened without anyone formally deciding they would. "What does the salary look like?" he asked. She told him it was more than he had ever earned. It was not, he suspected, more than the role was worth, which was Ruth's way of being fair without being sentimental about it. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "Start today." Over the next 4 years, Samuel built the operations structure Ruth had described, not quickly, not perfectly, but with the same methodical consistency that had carried him through everything else. He made the systems work. He hired 2 additional staff members, both of whom he interviewed with the specific attention to honesty and learning speed that Ruth had shown him, because those were the qualities he had come to understand mattered more than almost anything a CV could demonstrate. Bridgeway continued to grow. Samuel continued to study, not formally now, but constantly, in the reading habit he had built in the Cresswell Street Library a decade earlier and had never fully put down. At 26, he registered a small side operation, not in competition with Bridgeway, but adjacent to it, handling the kind of last-mile delivery work that Bridgeway was too large to take on efficiently. He told Ruth before he registered it, in the spirit of the transparency she had taught him. She read the business plan he had written, made 3 specific suggestions, and told him it was solid. "You're going to leave eventually," she said. It was not a complaint, just an observation. "Not yet," he said. "But eventually." "Yes," he said, "probably." She nodded. "Good," she said, which surprised him until he understood that what she meant was, "Good that you're honest about it, good that you're building something, good that the 6 years weren't wasted on someone who was going to stay small." By 28, the side operation had become Okafor Logistics, small, lean, profitable, and his own. He had 3 clients, 1 part-time driver, and a plan that extended 5 years forward in the same small notebook that had once recorded 43 job rejections and a list of mistakes he had refused to forget. And then the letter had arrived from Riverside Secondary School. The assembly hall at Riverside Secondary School smelled exactly the same. Samuel noticed it the moment he walked through the double doors behind the current principal, a woman named Dr. Abrahams, who had taken the position 4 years after his exclusion and who had written the invitation letter with a warmth that suggested she knew the full history and had decided, deliberately, to extend the invitation anyway. Floor polish, dusty curtains. The particular institutional warmth of a building that housed hundreds of young bodies 5 days a week and absorbed something of their collective energy into its walls. He stood at the side of the hall while the students filed in grade 11, the same year he had been when everything fell apart, 120 teenagers in the same uniform he had once worn, carrying the same mixture of boredom and suppressed anxiety and carefully performed indifference that 16 and 17-year-olds carry as a matter of survival. He looked at their faces. He was looking for himself, not literally, but for the version of himself that existed in this room. The quiet one near the back who was paying attention despite appearing not to. The one whose uniform was slightly less new than the others. The one who had already learned, without anyone teaching it explicitly, that the distance between where they were and where they wanted to be was wider than it appeared on any map and narrower than the people around them suggested. He found several, he always did. Dr. Abrahams introduced him briefly and accurately, founder of Okafor Logistics, former student of the school, here to speak about resilience and the road forward. She did not mention the exclusion. He had told her before the assembly that he would address it himself, in his own words, in his own time. She had agreed without hesitation, which told him something important about the kind of principal she was. Samuel walked to the front of the hall. He stood at the podium for a moment without speaking, not from nerves, but because he wanted to look at the room before the room became something he was performing for. He wanted to see it as it actually was. 120 young people in plastic chairs, a stage that was slightly too high for the space, windows along one wall letting in the flat winter light of a Tuesday morning. The same assembly hall where 12 years ago he had sat in one of those chairs and listened to announcements and prize-givings and the particular institutional optimism of a school that believed, officially, in every student's potential, while quietly managing its expectations of specific ones. He set his notes on the podium, then he moved them to the side. He had written the notes. He had spent 2 evenings on them, in fact, drafting and redrafting, trying to find the right structure, the right opening, the right balance between his story and the larger point he wanted to make. And then, sitting on the bus this morning, he had decided that the notes were the wrong tool for what this actually needed to be. This needed to be a conversation, not a performance. "The last time I was in this building," he said, "I was leaving it carrying a cardboard box." The room shifted, that particular shift that happens when a speaker says something that the audience did not expect. "I was 16. I had been accused of stealing a laptop from the IT room. I hadn't taken it. The school investigated for 11 days and couldn't prove I had. They excluded me anyway." He said it without drama, without the particular kind of emotional loading that turns a fact into a performance. Just the fact, stated clearly, in the same assembly hall where the fact had originated. "I'm not telling you that to make anyone uncomfortable," he said. "I'm not here for an apology. I'm not here to relitigate something that happened 12 years ago. I'm telling you because it's true, and because what happened after it is the only reason I'm standing here today instead of sitting where you're sitting." He paused. What happened after it was this: nothing, for a long time, almost nothing. He told them about the months after the exclusion, the mornings waking up at school time with nowhere to go, the kitchen table and the printed study materials, the library on Cresswell Street and the books Mrs. Peterson left on his table without comment. He told them about the cleaning job at 10 p.m. and the bus home at 2 a.m. and the decision to record his mistakes in a small notebook rather than pretend they hadn't happened. He told them about the 43 job applications and the 7 interviews and the 3 that ended the moment the gap in his education became visible. He told them about Ruth, not as a savior, because she hadn't saved him, but as someone who had looked at the same information everyone else had looked at and asked a different question. Not what does his history suggest, but what does this specific person in front of me suggest? He told them about the certificate and the further qualification and the 4 years of building Bridgeway's operations from the inside and the side operation that had become Okafor Logistics. He told them all of it not because he wanted them to be impressed. He had learned enough about the difference between being impressive and being useful to know that impressing a room of teenagers for 40 minutes would not change a single thing about what happened when they walked back through these doors into their actual lives. He told them because the telling was the point. "I want to say something to you," he said, "that nobody said to me when I was sitting where you're sitting." The room was quiet in the particular way that rooms get quiet when they are genuinely listening rather than performing the appearance of listening. He recognized the difference. "The world is going to have opinions about you," he said. "Some of those opinions are going to be fair. Some of them are going to be based on where you come from, what you look like, what mistakes you have made or been accused of making, who your family is, which school you attended, which neighborhood you grew up in. Some of them are going to be wrong. Some of them are going to be delivered with the full confidence and authority of people who have no idea what they're talking about." He looked across the room slowly, not performing the look, but actually looking, the way you look when you mean what you are about to say. The question is not whether the world is going to have those opinions. It will. The question is what you do with them. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that you simply have to work harder and believe in yourself and everything will be fine, because that is both partially true and deeply incomplete, and you deserve better than a motivational poster. A few of them smiled at that. Good. Here is what I actually believe. After 28 years, and specifically after 12 years of building something from a situation that most people would have used as a reason not to build anything, the world's verdict about you is not your sentence unless you sign it yourself. And signing it doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens slowly, in the small decisions, in whether you get up when you don't have to, in whether you record your mistakes or pretend they didn't happen, in whether you read the next page, even when nobody is checking whether you did. He paused again. The unglamorous truth about building a life, and I want to be honest with you about this, because I think you're old enough for honesty, and I think you've been given enough motivational speeches that stopped short of the uncomfortable part, is that most of it looks like nothing from the outside. Most of it is invisible. Most of it is doing the right thing in the right way at 10 p.m. in an empty office with nobody watching, or sitting at a kitchen table with printed study materials on a morning when you don't feel like it, or applying for the 43rd job after 42 rejections, or writing a business plan that might not work, but writing it anyway, because not writing it is the only guaranteed way to ensure it doesn't. He thought about his father, about the Sunday afternoon in the kitchen, the 2 cups of tea, the sentence that had finally been said after 7 years of not being said. He thought about what it had cost both of them to carry it unsaid for that long, not in any dramatic accounting, but in the quiet daily weight of it, the space it took up that could have held something else. He thought about Mrs. Peterson and the books left on the table without comment, about Ruth and the handwritten job posting, about Fatima showing him the correct way to mop a floor with the precision of someone who understood that no skill was beneath the dignity of being done correctly. He thought about Grace, who had believed him at a kitchen table when belief was the most expensive thing she had to offer, and she had offered it without hesitation. "I want to say one more thing," he said, "and then I'll let you get back to your Tuesday." The room was still quiet. There are going to be people in your life, maybe there already are, who show up for you in ways that are easy to miss because they don't look like what we expect help to look like. They don't announce themselves. They leave books on tables. They show you how to mop a floor. They call you back after your 43rd application. They sit across from you at a kitchen table and finally say the true thing. He looked at the room one more time. Pay attention to those people, and when you become someone who can be that person for someone else, and you will, if you keep going, don't wait for the right moment to show up for them. The right moment is whenever you notice someone needs it. He stepped back from the podium. "Thank you for having me back," he said. "I mean that in more ways than one." Dr. Abrahams said something gracious from the side of the stage. The students applauded, genuinely, not the performative applause of obligation, which Samuel noticed and was grateful for. As the assembly began to disperse, a student approached him. A girl, 16 or 17, in the same uniform he had once worn, carrying a folder against her chest, with both arms the way students carry things when they are trying to look more composed than they feel. She said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," he said. "What do you do when you apply for things and you keep getting rejected, and you don't know if it's because of something about you or something about the system?" Samuel looked at her. Behind her, the assembly hall was emptying, students filing out, teachers gathering their things, the ordinary resumption of an ordinary Tuesday. "You apply again," he said, "and while you're waiting to hear back, you use the time to become someone the rejection was wrong about." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, not the nod of someone who has been satisfied by an easy answer, but the nod of someone who has heard something true and is deciding what to do with it. She walked away. Samuel stood in the emptying assembly hall for a moment longer than necessary. The same floor polish smell, the same curtains, the same flat winter light through the windows on the left side. Different in all the ways that mattered. He picked up his notes from the podium, the ones he hadn't used. He folded them and put them in his jacket pocket next to the letter of invitation. Then he walked back through the doors, through the corridor, through the gate. This time, he was the one choosing to leave. There are people who will write your story before you have had the chance to live it. They will use what they know, your neighborhood, your school, your mistakes, your silence, your beginnings, and they will arrive at a conclusion about you that feels, from the outside, entirely reasonable. Let them write it, then live the correction. The life you build in the quiet, in the library, in the empty office, in the notebook where you record not your victories but your mistakes, is the truest document of who you are. No accusation, no exclusion, no system that failed you, no person who did not believe in you when belief was what you needed most, can author that document. Only you can. So write it carefully, write it honestly, write it even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. And if there is someone in your life right now, a young person, a struggling person, someone who has been written off by a room full of people who didn't look closely enough, show up for them. Leave the book on the table, make the call back, sit across from them and say the true thing. Because the most powerful thing one person can say to another, the thing that costs the least and changes the most, is this: "I believe in you." So we leave you with this question, the one that stays with us long after Samuel walked back through those gates. Is there someone in your life who needs to hear those 4 words from you today? And is there someone, maybe someone you have been avoiding, maybe someone you have been meaning to call, who has been waiting to say them to you? Tell us in the comments. Someone reading this needs to hear your story today. If this story moved something in you, stay with us. There are more waiting to be told.